I want to read a passage of scripture that I think is very much misunderstood today, and that maybe we can put a little clarity on it this morning. Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. For powers that be, the powers that be, are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Now, I want to address this passage a little bit this morning. In Romans chapter 1, the higher powers in verse 1, and the powers that be in verse 1, and the rulers that are mentioned in verse 3 refer to civil government. I think everybody knows that. Probably everyone understands this. Probably everyone understands that the admonishment to be subject refers to subjection to civil government by Christians and everyone else. Most Christians understand, too, that the concept of civil government is a divine institution. Now, civil government, marriage, and the church are divinely ordained institutions. Therefore, it seems like a person would assume that these institutions should exist and they should operate in ways that are pleasing to God. We know this isn't always the case where marriages or churches are concerned, and it isn't the case where civil governments are concerned. Why? Because of the human imperfections that are involved in marriages and found in churches and also in civil governments. But we also know that these imperfections do not justify rebellion against or the dissolution of any of these institutions, all of which are perfect in their conception. Throughout history, civil government has existed in different forms. Sometimes the higher powers, the powers that be, and the rulers that constitute government have been in the form of one-person rule, as in an absolute monarchy or a dictatorship. Sometimes the higher powers, the powers that be, and the rulers that are involved in government have consisted of a few people, as is the case with an oligarchy, which is made up of a few people, or an aristocracy where the rulers consist only of members of the aristocracy. There have been and there are governments that are constitutional monarchies. And this is where government is shared by a parliament and a person. These are usually characterized by perpetual intrigues and jockeying for power. Democracy is another form of government whereby all of the people ostensibly govern based upon the desire and the dictate of the majority of those people and what their desires or dictates might be at any given time. A democracy, this type of government, has consistently, throughout history, been disastrous and short-lived wherever it's been tried, and always leads, because it can't help but lead, to anarchy, which recognizes anarchy, that is, recognizes no governmental authority or rule of law of any kind. We're seeing a little bit of that, well, maybe a lot of that right now on a day-to-day basis in the news being displayed in our own country. Our founding fathers detested and they feared democracy. That's why I don't like to hear people refer to the United States as a democracy. It's not a democracy, it's a constitutional republic. And again, I want to say that our founding fathers made it clear that they had no use for democracy. They feared it and they detested it as more than anything else as a threat to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in America. All of the forms of civil government that I have just mentioned have common characteristics. Because of the preponderance of the human element, that is, the fallen, the sinful human nature that is in them, these forms of governments breed corruption and they result in arbitrary and cruel abuses of power over the people who are governed. The framers of our governmental system understood this. They understood the human element very well. And they did everything that they could to marginalize the human element in government and to warn the American public to fear and restrain government. George Washington warned that government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. James Madison, known as the father of the Constitution, warned that, quote, all men having power ought to be mistrusted, and that the essence of government is power, and power, lodged as it must be in human hands, will ever be liable to abuse. And Thomas Jefferson said this: the two enemies of the people are criminals and government. So let us tie the second down with the chains of the Constitution, so the second will not become the legalized version of the first. With all of the above said, and for the sake of a proper perspective on what Romans 13 verses 1 through 7 says about subjection to government, two things have to be understood. First, we have, here in America, a unique system of governance, one that has produced prosperity, progress, peace, and individual freedom that's unprecedented in the history of nations. Secondly, our government neither resides in nor is it subject to the arbitrary will and whims of fallen men and women. Instead, our government is embodied in written law. This is the big difference. Written law that's not to be tampered with, and it's not to be interpreted in tune with the times. Our civil government is codified in the Constitution of the United States of America. The Constitution is a document that's immutable and inflexible in its character. It's not like a rubber band, but it's like a chain. Remember what Jefferson said. He referred to the tying government officials down with the chain, restraining them with the chain of the Constitution. Now, to the point, and to conclude, our civil government doesn't reside in an oligarchy, not in a monarchy or a dictatorship. We're not under the authority of a Caesar, as Paul was as a citizen of Rome during the reign of Nero. Our civil authority has never been embodied in any higher powers, powers that be, or rulers. It's been embodied in nothing other, and it is embodied in nothing other than the Constitution of the United States of America. This is why people who enter the military or other positions in government take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. They don't take an oath to support and defend the president or the Congress or any governor or mayor against all enemies, foreign and domestic. They take an oath that they will bear faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States of America. That's where our government, that is our government. That's our king. That's our Caesar. That's our ruler, the Constitution of the United States of America. And when officials or government officials or anyone else break the chains of the Constitution or otherwise cease to support and defend it, they become domestic enemies themselves. Domestic enemies who must be resisted, brought to justice, and punished for their crime. It clarifies a lot of things and connects a lot of dots for people when they understand that for us, the higher powers, the powers that be, and the rulers, the civil government referred to in Romans chapter 13, verse 1 through 7, is synonymous with the Constitution of the United States of America. Our duty is to submit to the Constitution and to support the Constitution and to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Our American Revolutionary era preacher forefathers weren't misguided or foolish when they engaged as they did in the struggle for American freedom. And those people today, those pastors and preachers and other Christians who follow their example, aren't foolish or misguided either. Now I'll refer to something I said in an earlier podcast, something that has been understood till modern times and needs to be understood today. It's a good quotation. The first most important thing we have to do as Christians in America is to bring people to Christ. The second most important thing we have to do is to preserve the freedom that we have to do the first most important thing. This is Brother Kirkman quoting John 8:32. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.